putting great significance on things in our Qigong practice and in our lives. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. All right, you may have noticed, if you've been doing a little bit of Qigong, that sometimes in Qigong practices, there are some really quite small little details of how you move, how you breathe, sometimes even of how you think about things, where, there's a little change in just doing something slightly differently, sometimes ends up creating quite a significant difference in the effect, and what happens with your energy flow and within your body and so on. And that can be really interesting, really fascinating to notice these little details and the results and the effects that they have. However, sometimes we can go too far with this and pay too much attention to these little details in a way that it becomes unhelpful for us and even unhealthy for us. And so that's what I'm going to talk about in this vlog, both the positive side of that and the side where we can take it too far as well. You've probably heard the saying, it's quite a common one, that where the attention goes, the energy flows. This is a natural process where we put our mind, our awareness, our attention, we then tend to send energy there. If you think about your hand, just even generally, your brain wakes up, the neural pathways down to your hand wake up because you're thinking about it. The blood flow tends to get more active down to your hand and so on. And together you get energy flowing there. And that's a very simple, very specific example. But this then applies, to all sorts of things, and sometimes much more abstract things in many ways as well, where we're like, if we're putting our attention in that direction, our energy tends to go towards it. And this applies very much to some of these little details within our Qigong practice and within our lives as well. When we put our attention onto them, these little details, our energy tends to go to them, and we can end up with an outsized result from that, where it's like, by this little thing, wow, we get a big shift, a big change. Now, sometimes that's because, fundamentally, there is something quite significant about that little detail that, even if we weren't paying a lot of attention to it, it would, have quite a significant effect. But often there's also this extra layer that a big part of why it's having such a big effect is because of the significance we're placing on it, because we're putting so much attention on it, that's magnifying the effect of it. Now, this can be really useful within our practice and within our lives, because we can find by, sometimes tuning in, putting our awareness on relatively small things, making relatively small changes in our posture, position of our body, again, even the way we think about things, we can create a real change. This can be wonderful. This can be useful. Where this becomes unhelpful is when we start to think that those little, and I would say insignificant things, or potentially insignificant things, that we're putting great significance on are essential. And that, therefore, if we're not doing things, things are never going to work properly. Maybe a classic example of this, you might have heard of people who, are really into sports and they develop some sort of superstitions or rituals around their sports, and they think that, okay, they're extra lucky when they wear their lucky socks. And so therefore they think, right, and there can be some benefit in that, because they feel like, okay, when they put their lucky socks on, it brings their awareness of something, it gives them some positive thoughts, which creates a positive reinforcing loop within them that then changes their physiology in a beneficial way, and they feel more capable in many ways, and that can lead to a positive outcome. You know, there can actually be some benefit from that. But then the flip side of that can be, one day they can't find their socks. Oh no! There's no way they could possibly win their game, or their team can't win their game, or whatever, because they don't have their lucky socks. And that then becomes a very limiting belief, and it's actually causing them problems now. So yeah, it's gone from that placing significance, being positive, being helpful, to being negative. And so it's really helpful to be able to put this into perspective, so we can get the positive benefits of it and avoid the downside when we use it inappropriately. I'll use another analogy here to bring out maybe a somewhat different aspect of this. And this is relative importance of different things. Because again, there are these small details within different practices and within our lives. Hopefully the link to our lives is pretty clear, but maybe I'll make that more direct later on. But like, which things are most important? So I'll use a hypothetical case of someone making a cake, and they have a specific recipe for this cake, and there's a whole lot of different ingredients in the cake, and we're going to say that one of the ingredients in the cake is cinnamon. It could be anything else, but it's some kind of spice. And it's like, this is really important for this cake to have cinnamon because it's a cinnamon cake. I like cinnamon, so this is already sounding like a good cake. Okay, so the person making this cake, you know, they've got this recipe, and it's a famous recipe, and they know it's a cinnamon cake. It's really important to have the cinnamon, so they put a lot of emphasis on getting the best quality cinnamon, the right amount of cinnamon. Great, that's important for this cake. But they put so much emphasis on that they don't measure out the flour properly, or maybe they forget to put in the eggs, or, you know, we can go any number of the other ingredients. They don't use the right amount of butter, or, you know, whatever it is. Okay, so they got the detail of the cinnamon right, but they missed out some other stuff that was really, really fundamental. The cake is not going to be very good. So yeah, focused on the detail, missed the bigger picture. And if we get, you know, still talking about this cake, we think about, okay, what's going to make a good cake? Probably if you left the cinnamon out completely, but you got all the other ingredients right, you'd probably have a cake that is still works pretty well, rises pretty well, tastes pretty good, just doesn't have the specific cinnamon flavor. You could even substitute a different spice, and instead of having a cinnamon cake, have a ginger cake and have all the other ingredients the same, and just like, it's ginger now. And you have a pretty good cake. Whereas some of those more fundamental ingredients, you're like, oh, didn't put the right amount of flour in, forgot to put the eggs in, things like that. That is going to fundamentally change that cake. Good chance it may not be very good at all. And so sometimes, yeah, these little details, they can be really important, but they're only important when you've got the other bigger, more fundamental details right as well. So this applies very directly to our Qigong practice and to other aspects of our lives as well. One of the things that I often tell people when they're learning Qigong, because there can be lots of details within different Qigong practices, and they can also, you know, they can all be quite useful and valuable to understand. We get little things out of them. But it can be hard for people to put all of those details together all at once to begin with. When they're new to the practice, hard to remember all the parts. And so sometimes they get worried about this. Like, oh, but I'm missing this detail, maybe it's not quite right. And so one of the things I often tell people is, if you generally do a Qigong practice correctly, then you are generally going to get the benefit. And then the more specific details you're able to put in, then the more you'll be able to get a specific benefit, you'll be able to refine it. But if you just generally get most of the parts right, you're going to get most of the benefit. And that's really helpful because it's true, you know, to help people to realize like, all these details, yeah, they're important. Something comes out of them, but they're not the only thing. We can take a bigger view, a bigger perspective on that within our practice. In a similar way, again, if we expand that out to our life, you know, we might be focused on specific things is really important to us. But if we don't have the basics, like, for example, actually, we'll stick with Qigong to some extent, and our health, for example. We might be like, oh yeah, Qigong is really good for my health. I'm going to really focus on using Qigong to improve my health. Great. Qigong absolutely can be really valuable for that. But at the same time, if you don't give adequate attention to things like what you're eating, are you getting enough sleep, how are you dealing with other aspects of your life in terms of your attitude, your level of stress, things like that, yeah, the Qigong may still help, but overall for your health, there's some other stuff you need to get in place. And so it's like, yeah, okay. Let's see the bigger picture, see all the parts that are important rather than putting too much significance on the one thing. So anyway, hopefully this has been helpful to recognize the value of putting significance on things, because when we do that, we do actually magnify the effect of it. And so that can be great because we can then use small things to create more significant changes than we otherwise would, because of the way where our attention goes, our energy flows. On the other hand, it's really important to not lose perspective on this and to put too much significance on things, or let that significance become a restriction on us when that's not actually helpful to us. All right, we had some crazy light in this video with sun and shade and all that sort of thing. Hopefully it hasn't been too bad to watch. I hope you've enjoyed the vlog, and I look forward to seeing you on another one soon.